Tonight, we return to a mystery so old and so carefully engineered, it has swallowed men, money, and entire lifetimes without ever giving up its truth. An island that watches, a pit that punishes curiosity, a secret buried not to be found, but to be protected. For over 200 years, Oak Island has pulled treasure hunters into its orbit with promises of gold and glory. But beneath the surface lies something far darker, a design too precise for pirates, too intentional for coincidence. Flood tunnels that think, geometry carved into coastlines. Symbols that match chapels in Scotland and fortresses in Portugal. This isn't just a mystery, it is a message. One written by hands that vanished from history in the year 1307. Hands belonging to an order the world tried to erase, the Knights Templar. They fled with something Rome feared, something kings wanted, something powerful enough to be hidden on the edge of the known world beneath layers of earth engineering. So before you dismiss this as a legend or a tourist story, ask yourself, why does the island fight back every time someone gets close? Why does it feel less like a treasure map and more like a warning? And what if the secret buried beneath the pines was never meant for the world at all? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we step onto Oak Island, and some mysteries are not waiting to be solved. They are waiting to be awakened. Tonight we begin with a place that should not exist, a place that feels less like an island and more like a question waiting in the dark. Look closely now at the shoreline of Nova Scotia. The waves crash softly against the rocks, the wind whispers through the pines, and there at the centre of it all sits Oak Island, quiet, patient, watching. At first glance it looks harmless, just another patch of green in the Atlantic, but take one step closer and the illusion falls apart. Beneath the soil lies something that has haunted treasure. Hunters, historians, and believers since the late 1700s, a hole in the earth that behaves like it is alive. A pit that swallows ropes, drills, fortune, and sometimes even the people brave enough to challenge it. They call it the money pit. But money is the least interesting part of the story. What matters is why someone went to impossible lengths to bury something here, and why they wanted the world to fail at finding it. Imagine standing on that island right now. The sky is turning a stormy grey. Clouds roll overhead like heavy curtains closing on a stage. You look down into the modern remains of the pit, twisted metal, broken wooden beams, puddles of dark water. It feels less like a dig site and more like a wound that refuses to heal because someone designed it that way long before electricity, long before machines, long before anyone should have been able to create something so complex. That is the hook of this mystery. The deeper people dig, the stranger it gets. Each layer seems built to challenge anyone who dares to peel it back. Traps spring from nowhere. Water floods in from invisible tunnels. Every time humans cut a path downward, the island pushes back as if guarding something that does not want to be found. And here is the question that claws at every mind that studies this place. What kind of treasure needs this level of protection? What kind of secret needs an island built like a maze? Most treasure stories have a simple origin: pirates, thieves, rebels. Not this one. This story begins with knowledge. This story begins with intention. Oak Island has outsmarted engineers, bankrupted companies, and frustrated researchers for more than 2 centuries. People have tried everything: cranes, pumps, explosives, even giant cofferdams built around the shoreline to stop the flooding. None of it worked. The island always won. So tonight we are not asking what lies underground. We ask why. Why choose this island at the edge of the world? Why build traps that mimic ancient engineering? Why guard a pit with defences more clever than anything pirates ever used? And most importantly, who were the builders? As the storm settles over the island and the first drop of rain hits the earth, you can almost feel the history pulsing beneath your feet. Something was hidden here for a reason, something placed with care and fear and purpose. And the deeper we go into this story, the more you will wonder if the pit itself is the treasure, a warning written into the land, a message from a time long forgotten. Tonight we step into the mystery. The island is waiting. In the summer air of 1795, the ocean around Nova Scotia shimmered with a strange calm, the kind that makes you think the world is holding its breath. 3 boys pushed a small boat across the water, each paddle stroke sending ripples across the quiet bay. They were young, curious, and chasing a rumour that had drifted through the nearby villages. A rumour of lights flickering on Oak Island long after midnight, moving like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Some said it was pirates hiding stolen gold. Others whispered it was a ghost guarding something older than memory. Whatever it was enough to pull those boys toward the island, toward the place that would change their lives and spark a mystery that still refuses to die. When they reached shore, the island greeted them with silence. Tall trees stretched above them, the ground soft with moss. And somewhere in the distance, the call of a gull echoed against the branches. They walked deeper inland until something unusual caught their eye. A round indentation in the earth, almost perfect in shape, as if a giant thumb had pressed into the ground. The soil looked disturbed but old, like the island itself had tried to hide whatever happened here long before the boys were born. They felt it instantly, that shift in the air that whispers you are not supposed to be here, but curiosity is. Louder than caution at that age, so they began to dig. At first it was just dirt and roots, nothing strange, nothing special. Then 3 feet down their tools hit wood, a flat platform made of oak beams carefully arranged. They cleared it away and kept digging. 10 feet down, another platform, then another. Oak placed with precision at regular depth intervals, like steps leading into the earth. This was not the work of pirates tossing loot into a hole. This was construction. This was planning. And suddenly the boys were no longer excited. They were unsettled. Who would build something like this in the middle of nowhere with no records, no witnesses, and no signs of what they were hiding? They kept going, their breaths sharp, their hands trembling. Every new layer felt like a message. Someone wanted this buried, and someone expected that one day someone would try to uncover it. The deeper they dug, the more the sense of intention grew. This was not wild chance. This was not luck. This was architecture wrapped in dirt. When they finally stepped back, exhausted and confused, the sun was beginning to set. Orange light washed across the trees, turning the island gold for a moment before fading into the deep blue of night. The boys stared at the pit, no closer to answers than when they arrived. But they knew one thing. Whatever they had uncovered was bigger than gold, bigger than pirates, bigger than anything they had imagined when they climbed into that boat. They had awakened something, a story waiting centuries to be found. And even though they could not understand it yet, the island had just opened its first door. The deeper they dug, the stranger the earth became. By the early 1800s, new teams of treasure hunters arrived on Oak Island, each one determined to finish what the 3 boys had started. They lowered themselves into the growing shaft with ropes and lanterns, the air thick with the smell of wet soil and old wood. Every 10 feet the pattern repeated. Another oak platform, perfectly placed, each beam fitted with a precision that felt more like architecture than concealment. It was as if they were descending a staircase built for no human to climb. The men whispered among themselves. Who would go through this kind of effort? What treasure needed this level of protection? No one had an answer, but the deeper they went, the more the island felt alive, like it was watching them peel away its layers one by one. At 90 feet, their tools struck something foreign. Not wood, not stone from the island, but a flat slab carved with symbols none of them could read. Strange shapes, lines bent into odd angles, a message trapped in silence for who knows how many centuries. Some said the symbols meant 10 feet deeper lies 2 million pounds buried. Others claimed it was a warning, a curse, a promise. But the truth is, no one knew, and the island was about to make sure they never would. The next morning they returned, eager to dig past the stone and finally break into whatever chamber waited below. They lowered a platform, steadied their ropes, and began to chip away at the ground beneath the carved message. That was when they heard it, a soft sound at first, like a breath drawn deep in the darkness, then another, then a rush. Before they could react, the pit exploded upward, with icy water roaring through the ground like a trapped animal finally set free. It burst through the soil walls and swallowed the tools, the platforms, the ropes. The men scrambled up the slick sides, panic scraping their throats raw. The ocean had come for them. Within minutes, the entire shaft filled, 90 feet deep, cold and merciless. The men stared at the churning water horrified. There was no storm, no broken shoreline, no reason for the flood. It had come from within the island itself, as if triggered by their digging. That was the moment Oak Island changed from a curiosity to a nightmare. They had not discovered a treasure hole. They had stepped into a machine, a device designed long before any of them were born. The platforms were not random. They were checkpoints, and the flood was not an accident. It was a trap. It was a message. Stop digging. Go back. Some of the men wanted to leave the island forever. Others insisted the flood only proved the treasure was real and close. But all of them understood one thing. Someone built a vault so advanced that even in the 1800s, its defense system still worked flawlessly. Whoever they were, they did not want their secret uncovered, and now the earth itself was guarding it. It sat there in the dark, pressed into the damp earth at 90 feet, a stone that did not belong to the island or to the century that uncovered it. The men who found it lifted it with shaking hands, brushing away mud until the symbols emerged like whispers from another world. They were not English or French or Mi'kmaq or anything familiar. They were sharp and curved, arranged in precise rows, the work of someone who wanted to be understood, but not by everyone. When the stone was brought to the surface, people gathered around it as if it were a relic. They traced the markings with their fingers, searching for meaning in lines that felt too intentional to be random. And soon, a translation appeared. 10 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. It spread through the nearby towns like wildfire, the kind of message that guarantees you will never get rid of treasure hunters again. But the translation raised more questions than answers. No one knew who had solved it. No original notes survived. The symbols themselves did not match any known cipher. And the stone, the one piece of physical proof, quietly slipped out of history. Some say it was displayed in a Halifax window before vanishing without explanation. Others say it was built into the chimney of a local house, then destroyed during renovations. And there are those who swear the stone was taken by someone who understood exactly what it said, someone who believed it should never be seen again. What if the famous translation was wrong? What if it was not a warning or a treasure map, but instructions? A guide written for the builders or the inheritors of the vault, not for strangers digging for gold. The symbols were arranged so neatly, every line spaced with purpose. It looked less like a clue and more like a diagram, a sequence, a code meant to trigger something or to avoid something. Imagine carving a message for someone centuries later, telling them where to step, where not to dig, how to bypass the traps you created. Now imagine outsiders finding it instead, misreading it, and setting off every mechanism you meant to prevent. That is the story the island seems to tell. The stone may have been a key, not a riddle, and if so, losing it was not an accident. After the flood destroyed the early excavation, the investors grew nervous. They wanted proof the treasure was real. The stone was shown to them, the symbols pointed out, the translation repeated, but excitement soon turned into fear. What if the message was not about wealth but danger? What if it said something no one wanted spoken aloud? Something about who built the pit or what they were protecting. The stone vanished soon after, officially misplaced, unofficially hidden. People argued over it for generations. Some say the stone was a hoax planted for money. Others insist it was taken by a scholar who recognized its origin. But a stranger theory lingers in the shadows of the Oak Island story. The stone did not disappear because it meant nothing. It disappeared because it meant too much. And whatever words were carved into that slab of foreign stone, the island has kept them for itself. The map unfolds like a living thing, its edges weathered, its ink faded, but its story still pulsing beneath the lines. We leave the muddy mouth of the money pit behind and let our view rise above Nova Scotia. The coastline curls like a question mark, jagged and quiet. But when the camera drifts farther out to sea, something strange becomes clear. Oak Island is not isolated at all. It sits along ancient routes carved into the ocean long before the locals ever whispered about ghost lights or missing treasure. These routes were not pirate trails marked by chaos and greed. They were deliberate lines, drawn by hands that understood navigation with a skill far beyond the simple stories told in taverns. We see old charts spread across a desk, marked with symbols that feel familiar even if we cannot place them. Triangles, crosses, straight paths that cross the Atlantic with a confidence that should not belong to the early centuries. The ink loops back from Nova Scotia to Scotland, through the cold waters near the Orkney Islands, then down to Portugal, across the shorelines once patrolled by powerful maritime orders, then to the coasts of France, where secrets have been kept in stone for generations. Each line hints at something hidden beneath the waves, a route not used for trade or war but for protection, and as the lines connect, a picture emerges slowly, quietly. This was not the path of pirates. This was the path of an exiled brotherhood. The camera settles on a weathered manuscript, its pages fragile, its words half lost. We see references to fleets that vanished after the year 1307, ships that sailed away from Europe under the cover of night carrying cargo no one dared describe. Some say these ships fled from persecution. Others believe they carried something more precious than gold, a legacy, a responsibility, a blood oath written in silence. They were called the Knights Templar, warrior monks who built fortresses across continents and grew so powerful that kings feared them. When the French crown tried to crush them in the early 14th century, many were arrested, tortured, and burned. But the fleet, the heart of their operation, was never captured. It simply disappeared. Some historians claim the ships were destroyed. Others argue they scattered to Scotland or Portugal, where the order survived under new names. But there is one theory whispered in the corners of old libraries. The fleet did not stop in Europe at all. It crossed the ocean. It reached the shores of a place untouched by the wars of kings and the politics of popes. A place where a secret could sleep. When the map floats back over Oak Island, the lines converge like veins leading to a single heart. The money pit suddenly looks less like a random mystery and more like the end of a journey drawn centuries earlier. Lines on a map become lines in blood, a path followed not by chance but by purpose. Someone built the vault beneath Oak Island with knowledge brought across oceans. Someone who valued secrecy over glory, protection over discovery, and slowly the truth begins to surface. This was never about buried treasure. This was about safeguarding something the world was never meant to see. The night air in the year 1307 was thick with fear, the kind that clings to walls and lingers in the corners of quiet rooms. Across France, torches burned in the hands of soldiers marching under secret orders. The king had decided the Knights Templar were too powerful, too wealthy, and too dangerous to exist. By dawn he wanted them erased. In Paris they stormed temples and dragged knights from their beds. Chains clattered against stone as years of loyalty were crushed under accusations made in shadows. It was a night meant to end a brotherhood. But while the city shook with arrests and fire, another story unfolded far from the king's reach. At the port of La Rochelle, the sea whispered against the docks. The Templar fleet rested there, a collection of strong ships built for long voyages, each one capable of vanishing into the horizon. According to official history, the fleet was seized or destroyed that night. But the records are empty. No confiscated ships, no sunken remains, nothing but silence. A silence that feels intentional. Witnesses later claimed they saw sails slipping from the harbour before the soldiers arrived. Lanterns glowed dimly on the decks as the ships moved without chaos or fear. It was as if they had been waiting for this very moment, prepared for betrayal long before it happened. The question is, where did they go? Some say Scotland, that the Templars sought refuge under the protection of clans loyal to their cause. Others insist they sailed to Portugal, where the order simply changed its name and continued its work in secret. These theories feel possible, even logical. But then there is the stranger whisper, the one that refuses to die no matter how many scholars roll their eyes at it. The fleet crossed the ocean. It sounds impossible for the early 1400s. But the Templars were not ordinary sailors. They studied stars, winds, hidden currents. They mapped coasts no one else dared approach. They had knowledge gathered from Jerusalem, from Cyprus, from worlds older than Europe itself. And if they carried something that kings must never touch, something worth dying for, then the safest place to hide it was not another kingdom. It was another world. Some legends claim the ships travelled west to the edges of the unknown until land rose from the mist. A place unmarked, untouched, waiting. A place where the Templars could bury what they guarded and leave no trace for kings or popes to follow. The story begins to feel less like escape and more like destiny. The Templars were not running from destruction. They were completing a mission written in secrecy and sealed in blood. When the last ship disappeared beyond the horizon, the order was not dying, it was transforming, leaving behind the noise of accusation and carrying its truth into the quiet of legend. And somewhere across that vast ocean a new chapter began, one that would not surface again until centuries later, when a strange pit was found on a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The story shifts now to the cold northern seas, where the wind moves like a living blade and the sky hangs low over the water. It is the late 1400s, long before anyone in Europe has heard the name Columbus, and yet a ship cuts across the waves with a confidence that does not match its century. At its helm stands a man who would one day become a legend whispered in both history books and conspiracy circles. His name is Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, a nobleman, an explorer, and according to some, the last guardian of a mission that began with the fall of the Knights Templar. Sinclair was no ordinary lord. His family held ties to the Templars that stretched back generations. His ancestors offered refuge to fleeing knights when the order collapsed. And the Sinclair estate at Roslyn, with its mysterious carvings and impossible symbols, has long been suspected of holding secrets that never found their way into official records. People look at Roslin Chapel and see angels and arches. Others see maps, codes, hidden truths carved into stone for those who knew how to read them. Sinclair grew up surrounded by this world of whispers. So when the Templar fleet vanished in the early 1400s, some believe it did not scatter randomly. They believe part of it sailed north into Sinclair waters, carrying knowledge and relics meant only for the loyal. Evidence of this connection is scattered like breadcrumbs across the edges of history. Carvings of maize and aloe in Roslin Chapel, plants unknown in Europe until decades later. Norse sagas telling of voyages west guided by foreign navigators with a cross upon their sails. And in the middle of these shadows stands Henry Sinclair, a man who had both the resources and the reason to attempt a crossing no one would dare write down. According to legend, he did not set sail to conquer new lands or claim glory. He sailed to hide something, to finish the mission. The Templars began. His fleet travelled west from Orkney, hugging icy coastlines before reaching a land of tall forests and rocky shores, a place that would later be called Nova Scotia. To the men who followed him, it must have felt like the edge of the world, untouched by kingdoms and unseen by kings. But to Sinclair, the land was not empty, it was chosen. A safe harbour beyond the reach of crowns and the grasp of the church. Some say he met the Mi'kmaq people and formed friendships that lasted generations. Others claim he built temporary settlements before returning to Scotland in silence. What he left behind remains a mystery, but the rumour that refuses to fade is this. Henry Sinclair did not travel west to discover. He travelled west to protect. Maybe he carried documents or relics entrusted to his family by the Templars. Maybe he carried knowledge too dangerous for Europe. Maybe he carried something living, something of blood and lineage. Whatever it was, the shoreline of Nova Scotia begins to feel different when viewed through this lens. Less like wilderness and more like a sanctuary, a place chosen with purpose. And suddenly, the strange pit on Oak Island feels less like an accident of history and more like the final stop on a journey that began with knights fleeing the fires of France and ended with a hidden truth buried beneath foreign soil where it could sleep untouched for centuries. From above, Oak Island does not look like a place where chance carved the land. It looks like a puzzle. The camera rises over the tree line, and the shoreline folds open like a map someone drew centuries before anyone arrived with shovels or dreams of treasure. The water glimmers around the island, calm and innocent. But the moment we begin to overlay old survey charts and modern aerial scans, innocence dissolves. Straight lines appear where nature should have made curves, markers align where randomness should have ruled. We begin with the drilled stones, large boulders, with perfectly round holes cut straight through them, too smooth, too centered, too deliberate. They sit at different points around the island, positioned like silent watchmen. When we draw a line from one to another, something strange happens. They connect cleanly, forming a triangle so precise it could have been drawn by a mathematician rather than by the rough hands of 18th century settlers. Then we add the man-made depressions scattered across the island, the so-called stone triangle near the beach, the odd little pits far from any water source, the markers that early treasure hunters dismissed as coincidences. As each point joins the next, patterns appear, slow at first, then undeniable. Lines cross the island in repeating intervals. Angles mirror each other with uncanny accuracy. A giant invisible framework emerges, as if someone laid a geometric skeleton beneath the soil and dared the centuries to erase it. The camera widens, and another truth appears. The alignments do, not stretch outward toward the ocean, they pull inward. Every triangle, every diagonal, Every crossing line draws the eye toward a single location deep under the center of the island, the money pit. It is as if the entire island is an arrow pointing straight to that one impossible hole. And this raises a question no one digging for coins and gold ever stopped to ask. Who designs a treasure map bigger than the treasure itself? Who carves geometry into an island the way others carve it into parchment? This is not the sloppiness of pirates desperate to bury loot before someone notices. This is choreography, a performance in the land itself, a design built to guide or mislead depending on who was clever enough to read it. Some researchers argue the shapes are coincidence, that humans create patterns even when none exist. But the alignments continue not just on Oak Island but on nearby islets as well, places where drilled stones sit exactly where they need to sit for the shapes to hold. No drift, no erosion, no accidents. Someone arranged these markers with knowledge of distance and angle, with an understanding of surveying that should not have existed in the early centuries. And when we overlay these shapes onto known Templar symbols, the similarities become uncomfortable. Triangles that match navigational markers used in their sea charts, crosses that mirror layouts seen in hidden chapels, geometry that served as both code and compass. So what are we looking at? A map? A message? A ritual design meant to protect whatever lies underground? The more the lines connect, the less this feels like an island of chance. It feels engineered, sculpted by someone who knew the land would one day need to speak for them. And its message is simple. Look here, not at the surface, not at the sea. Here, deep under the earth where the lines converge and the secret waits. The flood did not come from the sky. It came from the earth itself, as if the island was breathing water through hidden lungs. When people first heard about the money pit flooding in the early 1800s, they imagined a natural disaster, a collapse, a mistake. But nature does not build perfect channels. Nature does not pack coconut fibre into the ground of a northern island where no coconut trees have ever grown. Nature does not craft beaches made of layered sand, clay, and stone designed to pull seawater inward like a trap waiting to be sprung. The more researchers studied the island, the clearer the pattern became. The flood was not an accident. It was a mechanism, a deliberate system meant to protect whatever lay at the bottom of the shaft. Something or someone long ago shaped Oak Island into a device. We begin at Smith's Cove, where early diggers pulled out strange mats of coconut fibre buried deep beneath the sand. Coconut fibre was used in ancient engineering to filter water, stop erosion, and create stable drainage systems. But no one in Nova Scotia had access to coconuts in the 1700s or 1800s. Someone brought the material across an ocean specifically to weave it into the island. They layered it beneath the beach, mixed it with stones, and built a complex drainage field. It stretched across the shoreline like a net designed to channel water into underground tunnels, flood tunnels, multiple ones, carved through the island with angles too precise to be natural, each one leading toward the money pit, each one waiting for the moment someone dug deep enough to trigger them. The moment the pick struck 90 feet, the system woke up. Water rushed through the tunnels like blood through veins, filling the shaft and drowning every hope of reaching the bottom. This was not just engineering, it was strategy. When we compare the structure to Templar fortresses, the similarities are unsettling. The Templars built underground escape routes disguised beneath chapels. They carved hidden wells that filled from distant sources. They designed false entrances that collapsed when triggered. Their architecture was not just about stone. It was about testing loyalty and outsmarting enemies. Some of their crypts even mimicked labyrinths, narrow passages that punished the unprepared. One misstep and a door sealed shut. One mistake and water filled the chamber. The Templars believed knowledge was sacred, and sacred things had to be guarded with more than locks. They had to be guarded with trials. Look at Oak Island through their eyes, and everything changes. The flood tunnels become a test of worth. The artificial beach becomes a shield. The coconut fibre becomes a coded signature. The entire island feels like a fortress turned inside out. A trap not meant to keep people in, but to keep people out. This was not pirate logic. This was temple logic. The temple mind. The belief that the most important truths must be protected by systems that can outlive the builders, systems that punish the unworthy. Oak Island was not built to hide. Gold. Gold does not need coconut fibres or artificial beaches or tunnels carved with mathematical precision. Oak Island was built to hide something sacred, something worth weaving a whole island into a silent machine. And if the builders were the same hands that carved labyrinths beneath Templar strongholds, then the flood was not just a barrier, it was a warning, a test, a message whispered through rising water. Turn back, or drown. For centuries, people imagined the Holy Grail as a shining cup made of gold, a trophy of miracles carried by knights and chased by kings. But the deeper you go into the old stories, the more the Grail changes. It becomes a symbol, then a secret, then something far more dangerous than a relic you can hold in your hands. When the Templars enter the story, the Grail stops looking like a cup altogether. It begins to look like a bloodline, a legacy, a truth that could break the world if spoken too loudly. As the camera glides back over Oak Island, the muddy pits and broken timbers suddenly feel different. Less like the ruins of a treasure hunt and more like the skin of a sealed vault, a reliquary, a container not for wealth, but for something sacred. Stories whisper that the Templars carried objects from Jerusalem, relics taken from beneath the ancient temple. Not gold, not jewels, manuscripts, bones. Records of a lineage that stretched from the 1st century to the medieval world like a shadow kings could not erase. Some claim they guarded proof that Jesus had a family, that Mary Magdalene was not a footnote but a foundation, that their descendants lived on in France, protected by dynasties the Church later erased from history, the Merovingians, the long-haired kings whose blood was said to carry divine right. If even a fraction of that is true, then Oak Island stops being a mystery of greed and becomes a sanctuary of silence, a place chosen to hide evidence too powerful to destroy, but too dangerous to keep in Europe where kings feared anything that challenged their authority. When the Templars fell in the year 1300, and 7 kings searched for their gold but found almost nothing, their records were missing, their ships disappeared, their most secret belongings vanished without a trace. What if they were not lost? What if they were moved? Hidden along routes only the Templars knew, guarded by families sworn to silence, and finally buried in a place far beyond the reach of royal armies. Look at the money pit again, the engineered platforms, the flood tunnels waiting like guardians beneath the earth, the geometry carved into the land. Does any of that make sense if the goal was to hide coins? Coins do not need coconut fibre or ancient filters or codes carved into stone, but proof of a sacred bloodline does. Documents that could change the history of Christianity do. Bones that could rewrite the identity of saints do. Some researchers believe the Templars carried scrolls from Jerusalem that traced a family tree no church wanted to acknowledge. Others believe they carried the remains of someone holy, someone whose resting place could never be allowed to fall into political hands, a child, a mother, a king. If Oak Island is a reliquary, then every trap was made to protect something fragile, something world-changing, something meant to sleep beneath centuries of dirt until the right eyes found it, or until the world was finally ready to hear the truth. The Grail might not have been a cup at all. It might have been a lineage. It might have been a story. And stories, when buried deep enough, become more powerful than any treasure ever forged in gold. From the ground, it looks like nothing. Just trees, rocks, and shadows shifting with the wind. A quiet patch of forest on a nearby island that no one thought to question for generations. But everything changes when you rise above it. The drone lifts into the air, climbing through branches until the canopy opens and the land below rearranges itself into a shape too deliberate to be an accident. A cross, a massive stone cross carved not into the earth, but into the pattern of the landscape itself. The boulders that seemed randomly scattered now form perfect arms, stretching north, south, east, and west. Each stone sits exactly where it needs to be, spaced with a precision that feels almost mathematical. This is not nature. Nature does not create geometry this exact. And it is not colonial settlers. They left no records of hauling huge stones into a forest for no reason. This is something older. Something planned. The cross mirrors Templar designs found carved into ancient chapels in Scotland and hidden crypts beneath French monasteries. The long vertical line, the shorter horizontal beam, the slight tilt that appears in some of their secret symbols as if marking a direction rather than a religious shape. When we overlay the design with known Templar crosses, the match is eerie, almost perfect. But the real shock comes when we plot this cross in relation to Oak Island. The lines point straight toward the money pit. Not by chance, not vaguely, precisely. As if someone built a giant compass in the trees to make sure the location of the vault could never be forgotten, only hidden. The cross becomes the first clue in a sentence written across the landscape, one only visible from the sky, one meant for people who understood that nature can be shaped into a message. We begin to treat the shoreline and the forests not as separate places, but as a single coded complex, a ritual landscape, the kind the Templars built in Europe when they aligned chapels with constellations or mapped entire estates according to sacred geometry. Their belief was simple. The land itself could speak, and here it speaks loudly. The cross in the trees might mark more than direction. It might mark purpose. Across Europe, the Templars placed crosses over sites where relics were hidden, where meetings were held in secret, where vows were made that could not be broken. The cross was a warning and a promise, a symbol that what lay beneath was not to be taken lightly. Now imagine the builders standing on this forest floor centuries ago. They lift each stone with intention. They align each marker with the care of someone crafting a message for the future. Maybe they knew they would never return. Maybe they knew enemies would chase them across oceans. But they trusted the land to protect their truth. Everything on and around Oak Island begins to feel connected. The drilled stones, the artificial beach, the money pit, and now this cross. Each one a syllable, together a sentence written by hands desperate to protect something sacred. The cross in the trees is not decoration, it is declaration. It tells us the story here is not about gold or greed. It is about guardianship. It is about faith. It is about a secret buried not in one pit, but across an entire landscape shaped to protect a single truth, a truth. The builders were willing to cross oceans to hide. The early records of Nova Scotia read like a simple list of settlers carving out a life on the edge of the wilderness. Acadian families farming rough soil. Scottish clans fleeing hardship. Fishermen building homes near the cold Atlantic tide. On the surface, it looks ordinary. But when you read closely, when you begin to notice the names, the symbols, the coats of arms carried across the ocean, the story begins to shift. Because mixed in with the expected settlers are families who do not quite fit the pattern. Families with crests that echo designs carved into Templar chapels in Europe. Families whose lineage seems to appear suddenly in Nova Scotia with little explanation. Some arrived from France with symbols woven into their banners that had no place in colonial farming life. A red cross on a white field, a rose with 7 petals, a ship sailing beneath a star. Others carried Scottish sigils with strange additions, a pair of bees hovering above a crown or a single chalice hidden in the corner of a shield. To most people, these designs were just decorations, but to anyone who knows the older languages of symbols, they speak loudly. Bees were sacred to the old French bloodlines. Roses marked secrecy in medieval lore. Ships beneath stars belonged to navigators who followed ancient routes. And chalices carved into crests did not represent wine, they represented inheritance. Acadian records mention a handful of families who lived unusually close to Oak Island, refusing to leave even when winters grew brutal or storms washed away farms. Their journals hint at obligations passed down quietly from parent to child, tasks never explained, watchfulness that bordered on ritual. One entry simply reads, "We remain because we must." Another mentions guarding the shore from those who dig without understanding. No treasure hunter ever thought to ask what that meant. Then there are the Scottish settlers. After the fall of the Proup, Templars, Scotland became one of the last safe places for their surviving members. Clans protected them, hid them, absorbed them, and when those clans crossed the ocean generations later, some of the old symbols travelled with them. Certain surnames that appear near Oak Island also appear in records tied to Roslin and Orkney. The same regions linked to Henry Sinclair and the Templar fleet. Coincidence becomes harder to believe when the same families show up in the same places across centuries. Local legends say some settlers refused to dig on Oak Island because their grandparents warned them not to disturb the ground. That seems strange unless those grandparents knew that the island was not just soil and rock, but a container, a reliquary disguised as a shoreline, a vault that needed protecting. Imagine descendants of Templar allies living within sight of the secret they were meant to guard. They would not need to touch the money pit. They would only need to watch, to wait, to make sure no one broke the final seal before the world was ready. The more we study the old names, the clearer the picture becomes. The communities around Oak Island did not form randomly. They settled like pieces placed on a board by someone who understood the importance of proximity. Families with symbols tied to guardianship. Families with histories older than the New World. Families who may have carried with them a duty whispered across generations. Perhaps the treasure of Oak Island was never meant for fortune hunters at all. Perhaps it was meant for the descendants of those who buried it. The ones who wore roses, crosses, bees, and ships, not as decorations, but as reminders. Reminders of a promise made long ago. Reminders that some secrets are guarded not by walls, but by blood. When treasure hunters first lowered their shovels into the money pit, they expected loose soil and maybe a few roots. What they found instead was a structure. Oak timbers stacked in perfect intervals. Wrought iron pieces buried deep below, where no farmer or fisherman would ever place them. Fragments of parchment that had survived centuries in the dark. Bits of chain and leather worn smooth by time. Each discovery felt like pulling back another layer of a story, built one piece at a time. But the deeper they dug, the more it seemed like those pieces were not construction scraps, they were clues. The oak beams puzzled everyone. The trees on Oak Island were thin and twisted by coastal winds, nothing like the thick, heavy beams lifted from the pit. These timbers had to be imported from far away, cut from forests where old-growth wood grew tall and straight. Every 10 feet another platform waited, arranged with precision as if marking stages in a ceremony. Oak has symbolism reaching back into ancient Europe, where it represented strength, endurance, and sacred protection. It is the wood of temples and kings, not pirates hiding stolen coins. Someone chose oak for a reason. Mixed among the beams were iron objects that did not belong to frontier life. Hand-forged, carefully shaped, some broken, some bent, all placed deeper than any settler would ever dig. Iron has always been tied to ritual. It binds, it guards, it seals. In medieval law, it was used to mark boundaries between the physical and the spiritual. Iron tools placed underground were not for construction. They were for consecration. Then came the parchment, a tiny scrap pulled from the mud, no larger than a fingernail, with ink strokes still visible. The letters did not match local writings. They were too old, too precise, as if cut from a manuscript carried across an ocean. Why would someone bury writing so carefully that it survived centuries under the earth? Unless the money pit was not just a hiding place, but a vault for documents, texts, or secrets that needed layers of protection. Other fragments surfaced as well. A piece of chain made by hands familiar with medieval craft, leather worked so skillfully that, even after decades underground, it held its shape. None of it felt random. Everything felt placed. When you step back and look at the layers, you begin to see a pattern. 10 feet oak, 10 feet oak, iron pieces scattered like markers, coconut fibre filtering water above, sand and clay arranged like a seal. This was not simple engineering. This was ritual, a descent, a ceremony in reverse. Every layer added like a chapter in a story only the builders understood. Templar architecture often blended engineering with spiritual meaning. They built crypts that doubled as lessons, staircases that represented stages of initiation, chambers where every stone was symbolic. They believed sacred knowledge must be protected through both structure and meaning. If the money pit was built by hands connected to that tradition, then each beam was a vow, each platform a warning, each fragment a reminder that what lay beneath was not meant to be uncovered easily. Imagine the builders working in silence, under moonlight, lowering oak beams into the earth, like placing pages in a sacred book, sealing the pit not only with soil, but with intent. They were not hiding treasure. They were creating a sanctuary, a ritual of protection, a place where secrets could sleep untouched. Oak and iron become more than materials. They become symbols. They become guardians. They become the language of a hidden truth, buried layer by layer, until the island itself became the ritual. Roslin Chapel rises from the Scottish hillside like a dream carved into stone, every pillar and arch packed with symbols that never quite reveal their full meaning. To most visitors, it is beautiful. To historians, it is confusing. And to anyone following the trail that leads from the Templars to Oak Island, it is something else entirely. A code, a map, a message carved into rock by people who knew their secrets would one day have to cross an ocean. Inside the chapel, sunlight filters through stained glass and lands on carvings that never should exist in a building completed in the 1500s. Corn, maize, a plant unknown in Europe until decades after the chapel was built. Aloe too, curling along the stone as if the mason had walked through gardens that did not exist anywhere near Scotland. People try to explain it away, calling the carvings guesses or imagination. But the details are too accurate, too specific. Someone had seen these plants with their own eyes. Someone who had travelled west long before official history admits anyone did. Scattered among the botanical carvings are the green men, faces of leaves and vines hidden in plain sight. They seem to watch from the corners of the chapel, silent guardians woven into stone. Their presence is old, older than Christianity, older than the Templars themselves. They represent rebirth, hidden knowledge, the cycle of secrecy and revelation. In Roslin, they feel like warnings. Then there are the stars, dozens of them, carved in geometric sequences across the ceiling. At first they look decorative, but when astronomers study them, the patterns hint at constellations and alignments meaningful to navigators. These are not random stars, they are directions, long-distance directions. Researchers have noticed something strange. When you trace the star patterns and compare them to lines found on old sea charts used by Templar sailors, the angles match. When you transfer those lines across the Atlantic, they point to the shores of Nova Scotia. And when you narrow them further, with the help of symbols carved near the chapel's altar, they lead to a small island with a crooked shape and a hidden pit, Oak Island. Some believe the chapel was never just a place of worship. It was a stone book, a guide meant for people initiated into a pattern only whispered among the Sinclair family and their allies. A pattern that could not be written on paper because paper can burn. A pattern that could not be spoken aloud because voices can be silenced. But stone can survive centuries. The geometry inside Roslin mirrors the geometry found around Oak Island. Triangles, crosses, spirals. If you tilt the chapel's floor plan and compare it with maps of Mahone Bay, the shapes overlap like a lock sliding into place. It is too clean to be coincidence, too intentional to be imagination. Imagine standing in Roslin Chapel in the late 1400s. The carvings glow in candlelight. The air is thick with incense. A small circle of men know that Europe is no longer safe for the truths they carry. They know their mission must continue across the sea. They gather beneath the vaulted ceiling and look up at the map hidden in the stars. They follow the pattern, they learn the path, and then they sail. Roslin becomes the first chapter of a story written in stone. Oak Island becomes the last. A beginning and an ending connected by geometry, secrecy, and belief. And once you see the chapel as a map, you can never look at its carvings the same way again. Freemasonry arrived in the New World like a quiet tide, slipping into port towns and growing in the shadows of taverns and meeting halls. In Nova Scotia and New England, the lodges rose brick by brick during the 1700s, built by sailors, merchants, scholars, and men who carried secrets in their pockets like folded maps. Most lodges were harmless, groups of neighbours sharing ideas and rituals that felt ancient even then. But woven among them were others, lodges with symbols carved a little too carefully, oaths spoken a little too softly, and lineages that traced back farther than anyone admitted out loud. When we open the old lodge records, the pages breathe with dust and history. Names appear again and again. Surnames we met near Oak Island. Surnames connected to Roslin, to Orkney, to the families that once sheltered the Templars after their fall. These men gathered not just for brotherhood, but for something that feels almost like guardianship. Their meeting notes mention the bay, the island, watchful observances, a phrase repeated over decades like a pulse. The trust remains. No one explains what trust they meant. No one questions who gave it to them. The symbols in the lodges grow stranger the closer they are to Oak Island. Carved compasses with angles matching the island's geometry. Stars arranged in the same pattern found in Roslin Chapel. A beehive displayed with pride. A sacred emblem connected to ancient French bloodlines and whispered Templar lore. Some lodges used the double cross of the temple, carved into wooden panels as if waiting for the right eyes to notice. Others included ship carvings beneath their columns. Not English ships, not colonial ships, but long vessels shaped like the ones said to have vanished from La Rochelle in the year 1307. People today look at Freemasonry and see politics or community service or secret handshakes. But the earliest lodges near Oak Island feel different. Their rituals hint at guarding rather than seeking, preserving rather than uncovering. They swore oaths not only to each other but to something unspoken, a legacy that had crossed the sea disguised in migration. Some Freemasons in the region were surveyors, men who understood land the way others understand language. They mapped shorelines with precision and drew geometric shapes across bays and forests, the same way the builders of Oak Island seemed to do centuries earlier. One map from the late 1700s shows a curious mark near Mahone Bay, not a treasure sign but a symbol used in old European lodges to indicate a place of importance, a point of silence. The more lodge documents we examine, the more the pieces align. These lodges were not treasure hunters. They never tried to dig the money pit. They never disturbed the strange markers scattered across islands. Instead, they lived beside them. They watched. They kept outsiders from pushing too far, too fast. Imagine a quiet lineage of custodians disguised as ordinary settlers. Men who built meeting halls not to chase power, but to protect the last echo of a mission begun by knights who fled a kingdom and vanished into myth. If Oak Island was a vault, then someone had to make sure the lock stayed closed until the right hands arrived. Freemasonry in Nova Scotia begins to look less like coincidence and more like inheritance, a whispered legacy passed from ship to shore, from father to son, from lodge to lodge. A legacy that says the island is not to be taken, the island is to be guarded. The secret waits for those who know how to listen. They call it a curse because that is the easiest way to explain something no one wants to think too hard about. 7 must die before the treasure is found. The words drift around Oak Island like fog, repeated by reporters, whispered by treasure hunters, carved into the lore of the place as if they were born with the soil. Most people treat it like superstition, a spooky line to scare newcomers. But curses rarely come from nowhere. Someone said it first, someone meant it. And when you start to look at the pattern, the curse begins to feel less like a prophecy and more like a warning coded in the simplest language possible. Over the years, men have died on Oak Island, not all at once, not in dramatic battles, mostly in lonely accidents, quiet missteps that cost everything. A fall into a shaft, a collapse of rotting timbers, a drowned worker pulled under by the same flooding tunnels that swallowed the pit centuries earlier. Each death added another line to the legend until the number 7 began to echo across generations, almost like a countdown. But what if 7 does not mean what we think? 7 lives is one reading. But when you dig into older traditions, especially ones tied to Templar lore, the number 7 holds heavier meaning. 7 seals guard holy knowledge. 7 stages mark an initiation. 7 guardians protect a sacred relic. The Book of Revelation speaks of 7 trumpets and 7 warnings that must never be ignored. Medieval codes used 7 to mark finality, completion, a boundary that should not be crossed. If the builders of Oak Island understood symbolism the way the Templars did, then 7 might not be about death at all. It might be a message for the future. A sign carved into the island's story saying, "Do not break what you cannot understand. Do not open what is not meant for you." Perhaps the curse was never meant to frighten. Perhaps it was meant to protect. The disasters on the island follow their own strange rhythm. Every time someone gets close to breaking through, something stops them. Flood tunnels activate. Shafts collapse. Equipment fails in ways no engineer can explain. Storms arrive with uncanny timing. It feels as though the island reacts, as if the system built centuries ago was designed not only to guard the vault, but to discourage the unprepared. Imagine standing in the year 1307, knowing you must bury something that cannot be destroyed, something that must survive centuries without falling into the wrong hands. You cannot write warnings on signs. You cannot leave instructions in letters. So you build your message into legend, into whispers, into the simple language of a curse. 7 must die before the treasure is found. Meaning, do not rush, do not pry, do not treat this as gold to be taken. Treat it as something sacred, something sealed, something that requires the right mind, the right heart, the right time. When you hear the curse now, it feels different. It no longer sounds like a threat from the island. It sounds like a warning from the builders. A last attempt to protect what they buried, not out of greed, but out of fear of what might happen if the wrong person opened it. 7 may not mark the number of deaths. It may mark the number of boundaries built into the system. 7 layers, 7 protections, 7 traps, and breaking them without understanding might unleash something far worse than water. So the curse lingers, not as superstition but as a final whisper from the past. Do not break what you do not understand. The island remembers. And it punishes carelessness. The ground does not speak with words, but with signals. And on Oak Island, those signals behave like whispers, pushing through centuries of dirt, stone, and secrecy. Modern treasure hunters arrived with machines the original diggers could never imagine. Tools that see beneath the earth the way lantern light once revealed carvings in ancient chapels. Seismic scanners, ground-penetrating radar, borehole imaging, technology that turns soil into a story. Yet, even with all this power, the island still resists, revealing only enough to keep curiosity alive. When seismic tests scan the area around the money pit, strange patterns emerge. Cavities appear where bedrock should sit solid. Empty spaces, shaped like corridors or chambers, flicker across the screen. Not natural gaps, not random voids. The shapes look planned. They look like architecture buried under layers of chaos. Some cavities connect in angles too clean to be accidental, as if someone carved hidden rooms into the island and then sealed them behind mud and water. Ground-penetrating radar adds even more mystery. The signals bounce back with unusual echoes, sharp outlines of something dense, something structured, something just beyond the limits of the beam. Sometimes the radar shows flat surfaces deep below the earth as if wooden floors or stone slabs lie untouched. Other times it reveals sudden drops, sharp vertical lines that feel like walls. Experts tilt their heads and say the readings make no sense, because no natural formation should look like this. But the builders of Oak Island were not interested in nature. They shaped the land into a machine. Borehole drilling brings its own revelations. When thin tubes are lowered into the ground, they pull up twisted samples of soil, wood, metal, and sometimes fragments of something that should not be there at all. Pieces of hand-cut oak more than 100 feet down. Bits of charcoal arranged in patterns that hint at controlled burns. Even fragments of concrete, like mixtures found in medieval fortifications, all buried far below the layer where any settler or pirate could reach. One borehole reveals a large void, a space so clean and hollow that the drill drops suddenly as if passing through air. When they lower a camera, the darkness swallows the light, but the walls reflect back smooth surfaces. Something is down there, something built, something sealed. Modern researchers treat their technology like modern scrying tools. Machines become the new divining rods. Screens become the new crystal mirrors. But the purpose is the same as it was for those who dug in the 1700s. To see what the island hides. To trace the invisible structure that someone crafted with the intention of confusing outsiders for centuries. Some scans show layered materials matching the old stories. Oak at precise depths. Clay packed tightly around voids. gravel arranged in perfect beds. Patterns that mimic the protective layers used in Templar crypts beneath churches in Europe. Those underground chambers often included decoy rooms, layered floors, and designed weaknesses meant to collapse if someone dug incorrectly. Oak Island echoes those same tricks. The technology does not solve the mystery, it only deepens it. Every time a new cavity is mapped, another appears behind it. Every time a chamber is outlined, the scanners blur as if the island is shifting. The deeper the machines look, the more it feels like the builders anticipated this. They created a vault that could withstand centuries and outsmart every new tool thrown at it. The earth hums with signals, but none form a complete picture. It is as if the island is telling us just enough to prove something is there, but not enough to reveal what it is. A puzzle that only responds to those who understand the original language written in oak, stone, geometry, and silence. The machines are powerful, but the island is older, and the structure beneath still hides behind shadows, waiting for the right person to listen. For centuries, the clues scattered around Oak Island looked like fragments of different stories. A vanished fleet in the year 1307, strange symbols carved in Roslin Chapel, geometry etched into the land, flood tunnels behaving like guardians, families settling near the island with coats of arms tied to old secrets, modern scans revealing chambers that could not form naturally. Each hint on its own felt strange, but not impossible. But when you gather them together, when you lay every piece on the table and step back, a single shape emerges from the shadows. A vault. A vault designed not by pirates or colonists or desperate men burying stolen gold, but by an order known for its secrecy, its engineering, and its devotion to protecting knowledge that powerful men wanted erased, the Knights Templar. The story begins with their sudden fall in the early 1400s. Kings and popes worked together to destroy them, fearing their influence and the secrets they carried. Yet the most important part of their empire, the fleet, did not fall. Ships vanished from La Rochelle without a trace, slipping into the night loaded with something too precious to leave behind. Not wealth, not loot. Wealth can be replaced. This was something irreplaceable, something that needed to disappear. Then comes Henry Sinclair, a nobleman with Templar connections deep in his bloodline, a man rumoured to have sailed west long before Columbus, reaching the shores of Nova Scotia with knowledge and purpose. Roslin Chapel, built by his descendants, holds carvings of plants unknown in Europe at the time, and star patterns that trace routes across the Atlantic straight toward Oak Island. The chapel reads like a stone map waiting for someone who can understand its language. Next, we look at Oak Island itself. The money pit behaves like no ordinary hole in the ground. Oak platforms at perfect intervals, flood tunnels engineered with materials imported from distant lands, coconut fibre packed under beaches to trigger water traps at precise depths. These are not the tricks of pirates. These are the designs of men who built fortresses that could outsmart armies, men who used architecture as code. The Templars were masters of that craft. Add to this the symbols scattered around the island, crosses formed by boulders, geometry embedded into the shoreline, markers that match ancient Templar designs. Even the families who lived near the island carried crests filled with Templar emblems. Roses, bees, ships under stars. It is as if the island became a sanctuary disguised as a fishing community. Finally, modern technology reveals what pickaxes could not. Chambers deep underground, voids shaped like rooms, smooth surfaces buried beneath layers of clay and oak. The scanners outline something structured, something intentional. a place built to hold what should never be lost or found lightly. When all these threads weave together, the conclusion becomes difficult to avoid. Oak Island may not hide treasure in the ordinary sense. It may hide knowledge, relics carried from Jerusalem, scrolls that threaten established history, records of bloodlines protected across centuries, things the Church tried again and again to bury in darkness. If the Templars built a vault to protect such truths, they would have done exactly what Oak Island reveals. They would hide it far from Europe. They would build traps no one could easily break. They would leave symbols for the right heirs to follow. And they would silence the land so completely that only the patient, the worthy, or the desperate would ever dare to dig. Oak Island may be one of the last echoes of a story the world was never meant to hear. A vault not for gold, but for truth. A truth buried so deep the earth itself was shaped to guard it. The road from Oak Island to Rome is not obvious, but every hidden story casts a long shadow, and sooner or later that shadow reaches the Vatican. Not through loud declarations or official documents, but through quiet hints, strange silences, and the kind of omissions that tell their own tale. When we tilt the lens toward Rome, the picture becomes darker, more controlled, as if someone long ago decided certain things should never be spoken plainly. The Church has never openly acknowledged Oak Island. Not once, not in sermons, not in records, not in any official stance. But when you begin to dig through old missionary letters and colonial correspondences, small cracks appear in the wall of silence. Missionaries in the 1700s wrote to superiors in Europe about unusual behaviours among settlers near Mahone Bay. They hinted at secretive groups, symbols carved into barns, rituals that did not match Catholic practice. One letter from a priest in the mid-1700s warns of men who meet under stars and carry old crosses that are not of our order. He never names the Templars, but who else could he possibly mean? Another document stored in the archives of a French diocese mentions irregular activities in the northern colonies. The phrase is vague, almost deliberately so, as if the writer wanted to say more but did not dare. Irregular activities was a polite way to describe movements the Church suspected but could not confront. Movements tied to families who protected something older than the papacy. Something the Church had tried to erase in the year 1307. As the centuries pass, the trail grows stranger. Anglican and Catholic missionaries both note that certain families near Oak Island refused to speak of their ancestry. They kept crosses in their homes that did not match any Christian order. They protected old books written in languages the clergy could not decipher. Yet no missionary ever reports conflict, punishment, or investigation. It is as if the Church quietly stepped back. Why? Perhaps they believed the settlers were harmless, or perhaps they knew exactly who those people were. After all, if the Church feared Templar secrets enough to destroy the order in the early 1400s, then they would have every reason to keep watch on any region suspected of harbouring survivors or their descendants. There is another possibility, one far more unsettling. What if the Vatican did not ignore Oak Island? What if they understood its purpose and simply chose not to interfere because they could not? If the island held documents or relics capable of challenging the Church's authority, then silence might have been the safest choice. Better to let treasure hunters dig blindly than to draw attention to something dangerous. Better to pretend ignorance than to confirm suspicion. Some researchers point to a curious pattern. Every time someone in the modern era comes close to making a major breakthrough on Oak Island, certain rumours surface. A scholar warned to keep quiet. A researcher suddenly retracting his own claims. A historian receiving unexpected pressure from unnamed institutions. These events are small and scattered, but they echo the kind of soft interference powerful organisations prefer. Influence without visibility, control without fingerprints. Imagine the Vatican quietly aware of Oak Island for centuries, watching from afar, waiting to see who would uncover what. Not digging, not declaring, but observing, because sometimes power is not in action, it is in restraint. And perhaps the greatest sign of the Vatican's interest is its silence. An institution that has spoken endlessly about relics, saints, heresies, and miracles has somehow never mentioned the most engineered vault in the New World. That silence rings louder than a confession, because silence, when chosen, deliberately, is not ignorance, it is fear. Lines begin to stretch across the map like veins, pulsing with a story far older than Oak Island itself. When we pull the camera back, when we stop staring only at Nova Scotia's muddy ground and look outward to the world, something extraordinary happens. Patterns appear, symbols repeat, distances shrink, and Oak Island stops looking like an accident of history. It begins to look like part of a network, a design spread across continents, a whisper echoing from places where the Templars once walked. The line begins in Portugal, at Tomar, the stronghold where the surviving Templars quietly reshaped themselves after the purge of 1307. Tomar is a fortress built like a puzzle, a place of spiraling corridors and star-carved arches. 8 pointed stars decorate its stone. Crosses, identical to those later found, carved into rocks near Oak Island, appear again and again. Roses are hidden in tiles. Geometry controls the very shape of the walls. Tomar feels less like a fortress and more like a coded message, a place built by men who believed secrets were meant not to be spoken but to be carved into stone. When the same symbols show up on a tiny island in Nova Scotia centuries later, you have to ask yourself, how? How does a remote patch of land across an ocean echo the artistic fingerprints of a medieval order that officially no longer existed? Maybe coincidence can explain one symbol, maybe two, but not all of them. Not when the patterns repeat in Scotland. Travel north to Roslin. The chapel sits wrapped in shadows, stone dripping with carvings almost too intricate to be real. There are roses, vines, stars, angels holding tools no angel should hold. The 8-pointed star appears again carved with deliberate precision. Standing inside Roslin feels like standing inside a map, one written in geometry instead of words. Some of the symbols carved on the pillars are identical to markings found near Oak Island. Few match the shapes formed by the drilled stones and boulders arranged on nearby Nova Scotia hills. Someone, long before modern explorers, was speaking the same symbolic language on both sides of the Atlantic. Move south into France. In forgotten chapels tied to Templar commanderies, the same motifs appear. A rose at the centre of a cross, a star nested in a circle, a compass rose engraved into the floor where knights once prayed. These designs were not decorative, they were instructions, coordinates, signatures. When all these sites are placed on a world map, lines of connection begin forming like constellations. Portugal, Scotland, France, and then Nova Scotia. Not random points, but places associated with escape, refuge, memory, and secrecy. When the Templars vanished from Europe, they did not vanish from the earth. They moved, they sailed. They carried with them relics, documents, perhaps even bloodlines, and they left markers behind, symbols only the initiated could read. This is the moment when Oak Island becomes something more than a mystery. It becomes a waypoint, a node, a station in a chain of sacred geography meant to outlast kingdoms and kings. A network built not for wealth, but for preservation, the preservation of knowledge that frightened empires and threatened the power of the church. The same symbols keep repeating for a reason. The same lines keep pointing to the same places, because these places were chosen. They were part of a plan crafted by people who understood that one vault could be destroyed, one library burned, one chapel crushed by force. But a network, scattered across continents, could survive anything. Oak Island is not the beginning or the end. It is simply the point where the lines converge, the quiet node where the whispers of Tomar, Roslin, and Old France finally rise to the surface. It was never an isolated myth. It was always part of a larger story, one written in stone, star, and shoreline. Bright lights cut through the morning fog as camera crews spill across Oak Island, hauling cables and equipment like explorers of a different age. Where once only treasure hunters and whispered legends wandered, now satellite vans crowd the shores, and drones buzz overhead like curious metal insects. The modern era has turned this forgotten speck of Nova Scotia into a stage, a place where mystery is packaged into seasons and episodes. The Money Pit is no longer just a hole in the earth. It is a storyline, a brand, a global obsession. We watch as producers shout instructions and hosts rehearse lines. Excavators roar where shovels once scraped the soil by hand. Every discovery, no matter how small, is framed in dramatic music and slow camera pans. A fragment of wood becomes a cliffhanger. A rusted nail becomes a revelation. Viewers around the world hold their breath as the screen fades to black, but beneath the spectacle lies a quieter truth. The island has not changed. The earth still hides what it has always hidden. The question is whether the cameras sharpen our vision or blind it. The broadcast age has done something strange to Oak Island. It has given the world front row seats to a centuries-old mystery. Yet, it has also wrapped that mystery in layers of entertainment. Every dig is filmed. Every theory is debated. Every anomaly is replayed in slow motion. But in all that noise, how much slips by unnoticed? How many moments are dismissed as clutter or debris simply because they do not fit the narrative of a 40-minute episode? The camera sees everything, yet the audience sees only what it is shown. There have been strange finds caught on tape for a heartbeat, then never mentioned again. Odd symbols etched on stones pulled from excavator buckets. Metal artifacts brushed aside as modern contamination. Small pieces of parchment or leather that vanish between scenes. Maybe they were unimportant. Or maybe someone decided they were better left unexamined. After all, when the whole world is watching, anything truly dangerous would have to be hidden in plain sight, not buried again, but ignored into irrelevance. Then there is the other possibility, one that feels almost uncomfortable. The idea that the flood of attention is not an accident but a curtain, when thousands of fans speculate about gold and coins and pirate chests, who is looking deeper, when journalists film every surface feature of the island, who is studying the caves beneath, when reality shows focus on broken tools and muddy boots, who is paying attention to the symbols carved into old rock faces a few meters off camera. Oak Island has never been busier, but busyness is not the same as progress. Crowds can be a distraction, cameras can be a shield, and sometimes the best way to hide a secret is not to guard it fiercely, but to bury it beneath entertainment until no one remembers that a real mystery ever existed. As we drift across scenes of bright lights and flooded excavation pits, we are forced to ask a final question. Has the truth already been uncovered by accident, catching the edge of a camera frame for a moment before being swept aside? Or has the island simply adapted to the age of television, letting the world watch the surface while the real story waits quietly underground, patient as ever, untouched by ratings and reruns? There is a moment when the digging stops, the machines fall silent, and the wind moves through the trees with a voice older than every map ever drawn. In that quiet, you begin to wonder whether the entire world has misunderstood Oak Island, not because the clues are wrong, but because the treasure may not be meant for us at all. We assume that anything hidden must be waiting to be found. We think in terms of ownership, discovery, reward. But what if the Templars were not hiding wealth for the first lucky person with a shovel? What if they were sealing something away for a chosen heir? Someone who could read the signs not with force or machinery, but with recognition. Think about it. Every inch of the money pit is built with intention. Every flood tunnel operates like a test. Every symbol carved into rock or aligned across the shoreline seems to point to an intelligence far beyond simple hiding. These signs feel like handwriting, like a message addressed not to the world, but to one person or one lineage. A bloodline possibly connected to the very mysteries that drove the Templars into exile in the year 1307. If the treasure is knowledge or proof of something sacred, then it would make sense that it cannot be opened by strangers. Modern technology can scan the ground with lasers and chart the depths with machines that the Templars could never have imagined. Yet the deeper we look, the more the island seems to resist us. Flood tunnels remain active, chambers collapse unpredictably, cavities disguise themselves as natural voids. It is almost as if the island has a mind of its own, reacting not to time but to intention. If the vault was designed to open only for someone with the right understanding, then brute force might only drive the secret further beyond reach. Imagine the Templars sitting by torchlight centuries ago, drafting a system so clever that it would outwit any uninitiated intruder. They would have believed some truths were too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. Maybe they wanted the knowledge to survive, but only through a specific path carried by descendants or guardians who knew how to approach the vault with humility rather than hunger. If that is true, then Oak Island is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a lock that only the right key can open. And that key may not be a tool or a map. It might be a symbol, a lineage, a word spoken in the right tone, a sign carved into memory rather than stone. This possibility invites a harder question. What if the world has already had people who could open the vault, but they never tried because they recognized what lay beneath and chose silence over revelation? Not everyone seeks fame or fortune. Some protect things simply because they believe those things should remain hidden until the world is ready. So we arrive at a thought both humbling and unsettling. The treasure might not be lost. It might be waiting. Not for machines or treasure hunters or television crews, but for someone who understands the language written into the island itself. And until that person arrives, Oak Island may remain what it has always been, a riddle sealed by intention, answering only to understanding, not force. Beneath the whispering pines of Oak Island, the air feels heavier as if the trees themselves lean in to listen. This is where every theory converges, where centuries of speculation gather into one impossible question. What exactly lies beneath this patch of earth that has swallowed so much effort, so much hope, and so many lives? The deeper you look, the more the island begins to change shape. It stops being a simple treasure site and becomes something more unsettling, a mirror that reflects the beliefs of whoever stares into it. For some, the answer is obvious. They see a Templar archive sealed away after the year 1307. They imagine chests filled with scrolls rescued from Jerusalem, writings that could rewrite entire chapters of Christian history, documents describing rituals, maps, and perhaps the true purpose of the order itself. If those papers exist, they would be priceless, not in gold, but in truth, the kind of truth powerful enough to scare kings and unsettle popes. For others, the treasure is more tangible. They imagine a portion of the temple treasure hidden from the world, gold carried across continents, relics taken from ancient vaults beneath the holy city. They picture ornate artifacts, jeweled objects, and sacred items the Templars swore to protect even if it meant exile and death. If that treasure sleeps beneath Oak Island, its value would shake the foundations of history. Then there are the boldest theories, the ones whispered between researchers who hesitate before speaking them aloud. The idea that the island holds bones of a biblical figure, bones that would turn faith into archaeology and belief into evidence. Or perhaps proof of a bloodline, a lineage the church has denied for centuries, sealed beneath layers of oak and clay and seawater, to keep the world from learning that sacred history did not end with scripture. But the strangest possibility is also the simplest. The treasure might not be an object at all. It might be a story, a symbolic grail whose real power lies in what it forces people to confront. The grail has always been less about the cup and more about the meaning behind it. It is the idea that something precious survives through time because its message matters more than its form. If Oak Island protects a symbolic grail, then its value is not in metal or relics, but in the narrative it unlocks. It could expose the gaps in accepted history, illuminate forgotten voices, or challenge the way we understand faith, power, and legacy. And that brings us to a strange truth. Whatever you think lies beneath the pines reveals more about you than about the island. If you believe in hidden gold, you see Oak Island as a vault. If you believe in lost knowledge, you see it as an archive. If you believe in sacred blood, you see it as a tomb or a cradle. The island adapts to belief, shifting like a reflection on water. Maybe that is the real secret. Oak Island forces us to choose what we think history is missing. It invites us to look at the past not as a closed book, but as a living story filled with hidden chapters. And somewhere under the roots of the pines that story waits, patient and silent, ready to become whatever the world needs it to be when the moment finally arrives. Fog curls around the shoreline like a living thing, drifting slow and deliberate across the rocks as if searching for someone. The tide moves, with a low, restless hiss, rising and falling against the island's battered edges. Everything feels ancient here, older than the treasure hunters, older than the maps, older even than the legends whispered across continents. Oak Island sits quiet, but the quiet feels watchful, as if the land itself is holding its breath. The old drill marks are filled with rain from the night before. They glisten in the weak morning light, like wounds that never healed. Rusted metal pokes from the soil in crooked angles, reminders of every failed attempt to force the earth to give up its secret. Even abandoned tools seem to sag under the weight of the island's indifference. For over 200 years, people have come here with plans and machinery and certainty, yet the island remains, patient and unmoved. It has watched countless teams arrive with promises and confidence, only to leave with mud-soaked boots and unanswered questions. You begin to feel as if the island is studying you as much as you are studying it. The mist swirls low around the ground, covering the old shafts like a veil. Shapes fade in and out of view, and for a moment everything feels unreal, like walking through the unfinished memory of a place that refuses to tell its story. The trees creak softly in the breeze, not violently, but almost conversationally, as if they have seen far more than they will ever reveal. Oak Island has outlasted kings who believed they ruled the world. It has outlasted companies that thought money could overpower mystery. It has outlasted generations convinced they were the ones meant to solve it. And wherever you stand, the same question rises from the cold earth. Is the island protecting something, or is it protecting us? Maybe the vault beneath the ground contains knowledge too explosive for the world that tried to bury it. Or maybe the builders of the island understood that some truths require timing, not tools. Perhaps what sleeps below is dangerous not because of what it is made of, but because of what it would change. Maybe the Templars believed the world was not ready. Maybe they still believe that. The fog thickens as the sun struggles to break through, turning the island into a silhouette of shifting shadows and pale silver light. The silence deepens until even the waves seem to hold themselves back. You look across the clearing and see a lone pine standing by itself, twisted by years of wind yet unbroken. It rises above the mist, like a sentinel, rooted in the very heart of the island's mystery. It feels less like a tree and more like a guard, a reminder that this small patch of earth has chosen what to reveal and what to keep hidden. The branches sway slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if the island itself is still making a decision about trust, about timing, about whether the secret buried deep below will ever be allowed to surface. And as the fog closes in again, the final thought lingers quietly in the air. Oak Island is watching, and it will reveal its truth only when it chooses to, not a moment before.